I call Catherine Delahunty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the explanations. Just to note that Te Kura, when they came to Select Committee, the board supported the bill and the teaching staff opposed it. So that was a very interesting experience, that we actually didn't hear from the teachers that this is what they wanted, but from the board might have supported it. Teachers didn't want it, and they're the practitioners. So I found that very interesting. On some of these points around pastoral care, we can write the word pastoral care into the Act, but the Select Committee, including the National Party members, none of us were particularly confident about what that meant. We did have a big discussion about pastoral care, and I'm really still not convinced, because early childhood, which has got many home-based care, which is a slightly parallel situation, the oversight issues are ongoing, the quality issues are highly debated, the need for review continues. So I think that we're setting ourselves up here to talk about pastoral care without really describing a sufficiently robust monitoring system. I didn't hear a sufficiently robust monitoring system. I think that on the issue of the disability rights and the Ombudsman. So the Ombudsman came and said to us that he hardly ever presented to the Select Committee, but the calls issue was of such concern to him that he felt it was necessary because of the risk to children with learning support needs to being dumped into calls. Because, and this is a fact because it goes through my office every day, there are a number of children for whom the schools are insufficiently skilled, do not understand inclusion and do not have the resources, whereby those children, 9-year-olds, 7-year-olds, who've been expelled or suspended or excluded, whatever you want to call it, from up to 4 schools. And so if calls is available for primary, and remember this is also primary, not just secondary, then those children, that was his concern, those children can be ticked off as not truant and not excluded because they're in a call. But the reality is, for primary school children and for the early adolescents, who's going to make sure those kids are doing their thing at home? Who's going to be home with them if the parents have to go to work? Because one of the things that parents have said to me of children with high needs who have been excluded is that they lose their jobs over this. They can't work because their child is not in school. And so primary school children need permanent 24-hour-a-day supervision. I just don't get my head around it. And just to give one example of an older young person who came and talked to us about this. She was one of the few young people that came before the Select Committee, and I was there for all the submissions. So one of the few young people, she came with the Southern Health School, and she said the problem with calls is, I would have grabbed that, I would have jumped at it. She said, I was deeply traumatised during my adolescence, and if someone had given me a get-out-of-jail-free card, I would have gone, no, I'm never going to a school ever again. I'm going to stay at home in my room. And she said, my parents were so desperate and worried about my mental health that they would have agreed to that. And it's not in my interest, and it isn't a good idea for me to be in school all the time. Now, that's out of school all the time and online. She said, living online is not living. And she's now become, thanks to the assistance of the Southern Health Schools, she's become able to go back into society and become a fully functional member of studying in tertiary education, a real success story, because the schools worked with her. And this is what we heard over and over again with the calls, is that there's nothing wrong with online learning. There is nothing wrong with blended learning. There's nothing wrong with the digital dimension to our lives, which has enriched so much of education. But when it's separated from the school situation and it's not part of that world, but when it's a privatised function for franchises to enrol people, and I also met with Gary Mirren when he toured here and he showed me the research, it's so patchy that you'd expect this Act to be a lot more rigorous. So on those issues, pastoral care, how do we actually ensure that children who've been excluded because they are supposedly the problem, schools will jump at that opportunity, Mr. Chair. Some of them are desperate about this. It costs them a lot more money to include at the moment, especially if they haven't got the skills. And so that's why the Ombudsman really challenged us. And that's why I'm challenging the Minister. How will we make sure that there cannot be the dumping of children with high needs into this environment? How will we? Because it's not here in the Act. Thanks very much.
Mr. Chair.
I call the Honourable Hikia Parata.
Thank you.